All right. How's it going, everyone? We got Erik, and then we got Victor here from the PillPod. Good to see all you
So
guys in chat. So, I think Victor, me and you were talking about all this stuff, and we're trying to get back on again. And then Erik, I noticed we've had everyone from the PillPod on, except Erik. So I'm super excited about this. And then I think we've talked a couple times, Victor, about like your research and stuff. And so we'll we'll go straight, I suppose, straight into Erik. I suppose. So what, Erik? Like, what is your research about? Like, what is all the cool stuff you're doing around semiotics and all that fun stuff?
cool, yeah. Yeah, well, first off, I'll say I'm quite happy to be here. It's nice to finally get a chance to talk live. Yeah, so my research has been I've been in the humanities for basically my entire post-secondary. I don't know, semiotics is just a kind of area that drew me in because I first got in through English literature. That's what I thought I wanted to do, and then as my interest started to like broaden as I was taking courses, I kept coming back to semiotics. You know, I learned first about Saussure and the semiotic tradition, which is obviously really important in critical theory. structuralism, post-structuralism, and all that sort of stuff. But then I discovered Charles Sanders Peirce, whose semiotics just like blew my nips off. Like it was a system of semiotics tightly integrated with philosophy, pragmatism, and phenomenology. And it was just something that was really, really compelling to me. And so, I mean, in the broadest sense, I just really wanted to start thinking about like what would French theory look like if they took up Peirce instead of Saussure? What would this look like if we had a tripartite sign instead of a bipartite sign? And I don't know, those sorts of things just have led me into doing my now my graduate degree with a heavy focus on Peirce and trying to bring some of these ideas into a dissertation really, so I can get diplomaed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's sick. So I don't know too much about semiotics, I suppose. I guess my introduction to semiotics is I read Baudrillard's System of Objects, and it takes a sort of like semiotics approach to, I want to say, like almost like political economy and like capital. I know a lot of people have said that, like, Baudrillard's first work is like the 20th century, like Das Kapital and all that stuff. But yeah, no, it's like sign value and exchange and stuff like that. It's super relevant to me, but I'm unfamiliar about Saussure. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then I listened to your guys' PillPod episode actually on Saussure. I believe you and Pills and Erik were talking about that. So other than that, like, I think we can probably give another refresher. So we have semiotics dude over here, Erik, and then Victor, you are the political theory guy, and you're looking into um sort of democratic voter outreach, or like understanding sort of voting patterns and stuff like that.
I think like at the core of it, my interest is like the conditions for social and political change. So like I notice a lot of left-wing political theory tends to kind of eschew the question of like how do we actually get like radical social change in society. I think they make certain kinds of assumptions often that like if we people want to be, for example, politically mobilized and they want to like be engaged in their community, or like there's that cringy like a vision that some people have. It's like, oh well, like I'll go to like our local town council meetings and we'll deliberate about like what we're gonna make our decisions, right? There's like that joke, like freedom is an endless meeting, like meaning you have to be like engaged all the time and making these radically democratic decisions all the time. Another way of putting that is I think sometimes there's a desire on the left to eliminate all alienated structures, right? That like kind of get in the way of us and our direct control over our conditions, right? I think a lot of anarchism, like left anarchism, is motivated by that intuition, but I also think a lot of radical democratic theory is. And my research is just really kind of trying to ask the question: is that kind of vision realistic? And like if it's not, how can we think differently about like social transformation that still goes in that direction, but maybe doesn't make some of those assumptions. So that would be like kind of summarizing it.
Right. Okay. Okay. No. That's sick. So we'll do the immediate synthesis. So, looking at semiotics and political theory, I assume you guys both sort of have political goals, or at least like a research focus towards like how politics affects these. So I guess affects your guys' like field. So I guess we could probably go to Erik. So if we're looking at semiotics, would we essentially be looking at in a political lens, like communication, outreach, and sort of how we interact with sort of like an economy or area of signs and symbols? And if so, like, is there any prescriptive thing regarding political theory that you could probably take away from semiotics?
I kind of struggle with this question for a long time because I guess the question is like, is semiotics kind of like a neutral medium to study things, or does it come with some kind of implicit biases or
Right.
ideological points of view? And like I encountered, well, you brought up like Baudrillard. I encountered the System of Objects text in like a material theory class because I'm also interested in Marxism, and
Mm-hmm.
at the time I was also interested in like Latour and kinds of different kinds of materialist theories and materialist semiotics. and Guattari as well. He has a lot to say about semiotics as well. So I kind of struggle with the idea that when you're doing semiology, so that would be in the Saussurean tradition. It's very close to linguistics, and it tends to be, I don't know, it tends to be kind of sympathetic to a sort of technocratic point of view, um, which is a lot of what's behind the sort of post-structuralist reaction to structuralism. Like if you read someone like Baudrillard or someone like Guattari, they talk about, well, Guattari's term for it is the imperialism of the signifier, the way that sort of semiology from a Saussurean perspective, but he kind of singles out Roland Barthes for this. But you want to translate everything into one sort of linguistic domain, and then you're able to organize and order everything. There's like a lack of questioning about, I guess, translatability between different semiotic regimes that Guattari puts front and center, and also Baudrillard, right? Like he thinks that all signification is laden with power, kind of sort of like a Foucauldian argument as
Hmm.
well. So these guys used the sort of critical method of post-structuralism. They developed it and they applied it to structuralism from the first half of the 20th century, and they really just tried to free semiotics, I guess, from the bonds of this sort of imperialism of the signifier and linguistically oriented theories. People like Chomsky are rolled up into these
Hmm.
theories as well.
So,
So yeah, I mean, it doesn't come with an implicit politics, I would say, but I think it supports a range of them, and
right.
depending on your orientation, you may be closer to post-structuralism. You may want to like get into it through one of those figures, even Derrida, but I mean, sometimes he seems a little apolitical to me.
Right. So imperialism of the signifier. So,
Hmm.
a little bit on that. Like, what I'm trying to think on how I could understand that. I actually don't. I'm a little bit lost there. So, how is this like sort of like an ideological thing, imperialism of the signifier? Like, I'm wondering how to think about that. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've been getting some of this stuff from a scholar named Gary Gnosko, who's probably one of the leading Guattari scholars who publishes in English. And yeah, he brings this up about Guattari's work. But the imperialism of the signifier is, I guess I explained it kind of quickly, but it is really focused on a reaction to Barth's work and the idea that, like I said before, that all sorts of sign regimes, right? Like you can think of language as a kind of rebus, right? Like one of those shirts, like I Heart New York, for
mm-hmm.
instance. You have a bunch of different sorts of semiotic regimes going on there. You have the linguistic one, which is like I and New York, and you have a heart, which is a kind of pictorial semiotic regime. And then what structuralism is going to want to do is it's going to want to translate all of those into linguistics. So you have like a propositional statement, like I love New York. And then you go on with your analysis. And it's very apolitical, it's very technocratic. It lends itself to, like, I mean, it lends itself to a kind of capitalism in a
Ah,
way,
yeah.
right? Like the imperialism of the signifier might also be construed from a colonial perspective as well, which it kind of suggests, right? Like imposing your ways of seeing the world, and then assuming on top of that that your ways of seeing the world are grounded in language, something like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, where all of our reality is colored by the language and the culture that we grow up in, right? And so, as you know, as American imperialism and British imperialism before that sort of ballooned and expanded all over the world, at the same time, it was imposing its ways of seeing the world on the rest of the world as well,
Right.
right? And so that's a kind of literal imperialism, but it's built into kind of Guattari's point of view. And obviously, Guattari's point of view comes from a psychoanalytic context too. Like he
Right.
ran a school in France, the board, and he was trying all of these different experimental methods of treating people. And what he found was that, trying to translate everything into this sort of semiological, structuralist, linguistic language really wasn't working. It's constraining. The whole idea that like up until Lacan, really what psychoanalysis tried to do is just, take out all the social and political context and just look at the individual, and then try to triangulate that individual into, what the mummy, daddy, me, the Oedipal triangle,
Right.
and sort of pointing out the imperialism of the signifier is just me picking up on the specifically semiotic attack on that sort of way of looking at the world. Obviously, like between Deleuze and Guattari, they have a whole bunch of different ways of coming at that. But for me, I'm interested in the semiotic perspective, so I sort of gravitated towards Guattari. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know if that I gave you a lot there.
No. That actually makes perfect sense. I actually like that quite a bit. There's a lot of different ways you could sort of elaborate on that through certain intellectual traditions and stuff. In my mind, that kind of like I feel like that's a lot of late 20th century theory is all sort of trying to contend a little bit with things beyond pure materiality that involve these sort of relationships with signs and language and at large like ideology as well. So Victor, so
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I was gonna say actually, like I think it's what's interesting is the regimes, semiological regimes, as Eric would put it. Yeah, like I think that's really relevant. It's one of the things that I kind of think about a lot when I think about the problem of social and political change, because I think as Eric implied there, to change, like I think radical politics, like one of its kind of entries of attack through philosophy is to think about the ways in which like the way we talk about things and like our semiological regime, right? There's something at least contingent about it that like it could be a different way, right? You can have several kinds of semiological regimes. So I mean, it's not something that I specifically look at in my research, but it's definitely like politically I think it's very adjacent to the question of how do we like change things towards a more like leftist political direction, at least. So I just wanted to like flag that kind of.
That's actually literally what I was going to ask you. That's something sort of right now. Like I see it's a I think sort of like that's something that at least leftist or sort of like a group of people pushing towards a sort of anti-capitalist or more emancipatory sort of politics. That's something I see very neglected. I don't think we even contend with language. It's sort of just these. Well, I mean, we do, but in a sort of libidinal and unconscious way, right? Like it's like crush capitalism or like all of these really weird sort of ideological things. And there's not a like an analysis past pure just sort of ideological goalpost, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's just a huge challenge. I mean, on some of the previous episodes of the PillPod, I think even the recent one we recorded, which was actually about more cognitive science issues, we did start talking a little bit about phenomenology and habit. And I think like, I mean, I don't know. I'd be curious to know what like how like what Eric actually thinks about. So like Merleau-Ponty makes a lot of claims that our subjectivity is structured by like our habit body, like the way we are habituated through our embodied engagement with the world kind of ends up influencing the way we perceive the world. And I'd be curious if Eric how he sees semiology fitting into that, or if he does. Can you think about semiotic regimes as a form of embodied attunement to the world or something like that?
Yeah. Sit back for a second, Epoch. We're gonna take over.
All right, hell yeah, let's do it, dude.
Oh, sorry,
No,
I'm
no,
just
please,
yeah.
just kidding. But I'll answer that. Yeah, no, I mean, habit is central for Peirce, right? I would say that there is a work yet to be done comparing like Ponty and Peirce on a wide scale. But I mean, habit is belief. That's what it is in Peirce, right? So whenever we believe something about the world, it's because we have a mental habit, and often so many unexamined habits that we have, and unexamined beliefs, right? Like just even the simple, silly things like, you get out of bed in the morning, you expect there to be a floor there. You don't expect to fall 20 stories or however high up you live. And then also, like, because he's interested in a kind of scientific metaphysics as well with his pragmatism. It's also beliefs about the world, statements we make, whether we're scientists studying genetics or language or culture, when we make assertions, we make those assertions based on our beliefs. And so for Peirce, belief is a habit, what he later in his semiotics refers to as symbols. he calls a symbol a belief, which is,
Hmm.
don't get it confused with other interpretations of the word symbol, like especially those from Saussure. That'll mess you up. You have to go read Peirce for that. But yeah, belief is really a habit, and habits are things that we try to maintain against doubts that emerge in the process of our investigating whatever phenomenon we're interested in. So if you are convinced, for instance, that, I don't know, silly throwaway argument that like God created all species and all living things on the planet, you might not accept a Darwinian point of view, because Darwin comes out about evolutionism. And if you can devise the right experiments, you might begin to spread doubt about the sort of theological perspective. And then once a doubt emerges, the purpose of philosophy for Peirce is to try and escape from that doubt again. And oftentimes, escaping from doubt means giving up the belief. So, I mean, I don't know how to wing the connection between that and Ponty, because I'm not such a great Ponty scholar, but I think there's a lot of overlap there. And I've often read some of the sort of embodied mind theory that is based on Ponty's philosophy quite a bit, and I just see a lot of resemblances and similarities there. I mean, Person and Whitehead as well have a lot in common. So there's a lot of interesting areas. I mean, I can't do it all, obviously. I'm just one person, but yeah, those are the sorts of things that made me interested in Peirce, because for Saussure, I never really saw those connections with Saussure quite so heavily, even though Saussure's semiotics was, or semiology, I'm calling it, was a lot more developed, because Peirce's, just the history is so dismal about how Peirce's work made it to us. It's just really bad. Really long history of really bad care for his papers after he died and things like that. But that's another story. Yeah, that's how I would put it.
All right. Yeah, I know very little about Ponty as well. It seems like there's a lot like of a what you were describing, sort of like a social psychoanalysis tinge to everything, right? Like you don't really do what you think you're doing, and sort of that comes from sort of belief structures and interaction with the world.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
No,
I don't
please,
wanna
please.
take this over.
Please. No, please take over.
Okay, so I was just going to say, I think, for Merleau-Ponty, one of the the big insight for him, I think, is just the way we're an embodied being, and like the way our body kind of changes in response to the way we're coping with the world. Like our perceptual world opens up differently. So, we will like see the world as soliciting or inviting our engagement with it based on sort of how we've been habituated. And one of the things that we brought up in the last podcast episode that hasn't been released yet, but we recorded, was like color perception came up. And this is one way where we could connect it to semiology or semiotics, because one of the there's a pretty well-known experiment that kind of shows that seems to be some perceptual differences between native language speakers depending on how they categorize the colors on the spectrum. So they would do this experiment. I think there's these tribes in Africa where they color categorize, or they divide up what we would call green into like maybe 2 subcategories. But then for them, the blue-green barrier doesn't exist. So what these people did, they did these experiments where they made a circle with like 12 squares right at the color boundary between those two. And what they found was that like right at the blue-green boundary, Westerners could see the square that was different. So there'd be one that would be on slightly the other side of the color category. Westerners could see it, but then those tribes that for them that was the same color category, they couldn't detect, or nearly as easily anyway, the square that was a little bit different. And similarly, they had a bunch of squares that were kind of green, but then there was one that was a shade a little bit more to the other color category. And the whole idea, I guess, is that language, like the way we're categorizing the world, is going to draw our attention to like a distinction. Like the distinction is kind of what jumps out as a result of categorizing the world. So it's not so much that they're necessarily seeing those colors differently. It's just that the boundary on the color spectrum is what is kind of jumping out at them. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that made sense.
No, that's actually really, holy shit, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that. I think it's like, we have this sort of weird impetus when we want to solve problems or look at things. Everything becomes sort of partitioned to this really like dull, like here is an answer here and there and there. And I like, dude, even when you're getting down to like color stuff like that with individuals, it shows how multivariate shit is. And I think these questions are like a lot more deep and troublesome in many ways than I think what like a lot of like people want to sort of I guess internalize in a political context,
Yeah, and I guess the insight from that would be, okay, like if the way the like color categorization is leading us to sort of unconsciously the world will present itself in accordance with those color categorizations, I guess the thought would be, well, like in what way are other ways that we're categorizing things that are maybe more relevant directly to politics? What way are they causing us to sort of see the world in this, or the world inviting or kind of disallowing certain engagement with it? So I mean, that's like one of the things I think about in terms of like something that we have to fight against if we want social change, like just to connect it back to some of my interests, sort of. It's like, how do we get past those things where like we don't even necessarily know how, like we can't necessarily put our finger on how the categorization of things is leading us astray potentially from more emancipatory politics, for example, right? So
right. Erik, what do you think on that, man?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking more generally, like I've read a bit of Ponty. I love like he's so different from reading other phenomenologists because of his focus on experimental like settings too, right? Like if you're reading like phenomenology of perception, he's referencing a lot of the Gestalt psychologists and psychological experiments that they were doing like all the way up until I guess Gestalt psychology emerged like around the turn of the 1900s and made a lot of progress in understanding the fundamentals of human perception and how weird it is, right? Like everyone's seen those sorts of the duck rabbit photograph
yeah.
or like the dolphin girl photograph, and people have or like image, I guess. And people have all these funny theories, like depending on what you're thinking about the moment, you might see a dolphin or you might see a naked lady. And if you see the naked lady, it means you were thinking about sex or like I don't that's besides the point. Just the sheer weirdness of how our perception and our minds are kind of connected, but one doesn't come before the other. I just love the way he's very experimentally oriented with his philosophy. He's always bringing it down to earth with figure ground or gestalt, seeing like there's a sort of whole idea in your mind and you sort of see more particular parts through that. And it's just really interesting. It's different when you read someone like Heidegger. He's not super concerned with any kind of experimental evidence. He just kind of lays it out like this is the way it is. This is why all metaphysics has been wrong up to me. But luckily, I came along to correct all you idiots, so that that's on track again.
That's Heidegger in a nutshell, to say the least. Very continental.
Yeah, Ponty's much more open-minded, it seems, but yeah, he's the phenomenologist who talks about the body. Heidegger famously does not mention it, and right. I guess Peirce is not a big body guy as far as I can tell, but I think you could probably add it in there.
Is there sort of like I'm wondering that's actually really fascinating. I might have to put Ponty on my reading list sooner than later. I was wondering, is there any, this is what I've been coming back to, right? I'm reading specifically right now. I got done with Spinoza's Ethics and I'm on to Deleuze's book on Spinoza. And something that sort of, there's like a subtext there that I'm noticing is that there's like this, okay, if we're going to approach emancipatory politics, outreach to other people, relationships, building these relationships, there's like this, we have to be able to harness like an almost emotional impulse in the beginning, or at least understand and not moralize things. And when we do moralize things, we can get sucked into like sadness and like these depressive modes of thought. And I could imagine it affects, right, signs and symbols. If you're sad, you only interpret something in one way, or there's like a raw cynicism in which you approach certain things. Is that stuff that Ponty sort of goes into, I suppose, in a psychological sense?
I'm not sure if like the emotional. I mean, I think there might be something. Yeah, I mean, though actually, what really comes to mind more is just I think it's Heidegger, right, who talks about attunement or like
Oh yeah.
mood, right? And like I can't really remember if Ponty talks. Oh, sorry, if Ponty specifically talks about that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. So what do you guys think about that? What is this is just where my headspace is, I suppose. At least for politics, man, I really Victor, I heard you talking about this. I can't remember what pod you were saying like, man, it's sort of cool to be unhappy or something like that. It seems
Oh
like
yeah.
there's like a sociological wave right now of cynicism, and I mean it makes sense in a material sense, right? Shit's not too good. But I think that like almost channeling a again, this is where my headspace is at. I never thought about things like this from a very political context, but channeling sort of an emotional impetus and making sure people at least have a level of joy. I feel like that's really
Well,
important, and we don't emphasize that. And I'm wondering what you guys think of that.
well,
Mhm.
what comes to my mind right away is like also bring it back a bit to semiotics is like today. I mean, I don't know if this is exactly related to like cynicism, but it might be. Um, just like the manner in which people are attached to their signifiers in politics, right? So
Right.
like people are very attached to the signifier of socialism or anarchism or like calling people fascist, right? They're very attached. They're very emotionally attached to the signifier. And what always frustrates me a little bit is like, I've said this, I think I said this to you, Ian, once, like that, like Trump, like he's really bad. And like it would be more helpful to just like talk specifically about what makes Trump bad, like talk about the specific acts and the things that he's done that make him shit.
Right.
But then it's like, but then if you just call him a fascist, it's like, it's lazy because you
Right.
don't actually like identify the things that make him bad. You just say fascist, and then it's like, what is so you? But instead, you get this like emotional rush from ooh, the signifier has this power. I think of being like
Mhm.
fascist, and I think similarly with like socialism, I feel like people are like, as a leftist myself, like I sometimes call myself a nonpartisan leftist because I feel like there's something useful, at least if someone who's gonna like me who's gonna decide to devote their life to thinking and reading about these things at like in an academic setting. Like I want to know like what are the specific concrete things that are going to make life better for the most number of people with some kind of vague egalitarian ethic. But it's like, but does that mean that it has to be this like doctrinaire socialism? Like I
Right.
just don't know. Like I'd rather just be thinking concretely about things that are going to make people's lives better than dying on some hill of like this signifier of socialist or you're not a real socialist. It's just so cringe,
Well,
you know?
you know what's really hilarious is as someone who's I'm arguably the most educated on materialism and Marxism at large. I've read probably more Marxist literature than anything else. That is like textbook quote unquote what they call like idealism, right? That like in the most like bare bones way, like the signifier of socialism or understanding things through an idealistic or ideological lens. I mean, that is like idealism of what they vilify more than anything. And it's a really huge, weird, funny contradiction. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's quite important. It's important to talk about. I don't think that and it's hard to talk about, like there has to be a level of sort of understanding of like, what we were talking about, like phenomenology and stuff. And people don't like our headspace is not there. And again, that's why I sort of, I've talked a lot about I think philosophy in so many ways as a political science guy. I mean, that's like my major. Um, there's something inherently a little bit more radical in my mind. If you're interested in radical politics with philosophy, then there ever will be in a sort of political science lens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting at the line between just having ideals and idealism.
Right.
Like, of course, like radical political theorists have all sorts of ideals. They have more ideals than anybody else really does. Because when you talk to like party line towing liberals or conservatives in their current manifestations, they're all about what's realistic, what can be done, what can be done within the confines of the system as it exists right now. And it's not very idealistic. They're sort of realistic. But
Hmm.
I guess the line between having a bunch of ideals, like communism doesn't exist, it's an ideal, but being an idealist almost means that those ideals take precedence. and they just color the way you see the world, and then you get this sort of smoothing over of the complexities of situations, like Victor was just referring to by calling Trump a fascist. It's like,
Right.
well, why? How do we get into it, and what perspective is he a fascist from? Like, I totally agree. He's a fascist. He's aspiring autocrat, or he was, but no longer, because he's not president anymore. But that's the sort of idea, like the line between having ideals and being just full blown idealism, just reducing the world to maybe a set of ideals. And then I guess what you were talking about before, the question you were asking about sorts of emotion and affect, right? Like I like that. I wish I could look more into this angle. I haven't yet, coming from Spinoza and leading to Deleuze and the idea that, everything sort of just consists of bodies and affects. And that's the basic place to start from. It's really good. I mean, what we get to a point where we just say, like outbursts of emotion are great. When people are pissed or upset, like that's when they're most malleable in a way, right? Like what was behind, for instance, Occupy Wall Street, right? Was this great releasing of this collective emotional energy, and we go and we occupy all the capitalists and the Wall Street tycoons, and we take back what is ours. But the problem is that that kind of stuff is ephemeral. It's fleeting. It breaks down, and then it I don't know, it develops new lines of flight that can't hold that original movement together, because then people start to think, well, I want to go in this direction. Now that we're here, I want to go this way. And then other people are like, no, I want to go this way. And then things just fall apart, despite the fact that you have people like Zizek there, and I don't know, David Harvey or someone else, people trying to sort of control the movement of the affects among the bodies, but it just doesn't work. So you need to think about how to build something lasting, right? You got to think about, what do those moments show you is wrong with the world? Like, we've been accepting something up until this point, and now we're not going to take it. But what happens when that emotional energy is spent, and we need to actually plant a real and lasting movement in the ground that isn't up to the whims of just how people are feeling at the moment? Because that seems like a recipe for, everything just falling back into business as usual again. And that's what I worry a lot about the current pandemic. And, after the Deus Ex Machina freaking vaccine program saves us, is everything just going to go back to business as usual? Or are we actually going to be able to build something lasting from the insights, the sorts of do nothing politics that, like, I don't know, in my country, in my province, the conservatives are a very sort of, they talk a big rhetorical game, but it's all really just a cover for a do nothing approach. And I'm sure liberals too are like that in many places. I'm not saying I prefer one or the other, but the point is that this has been revealed to us. And now what do we do going forward? Yes, express your outrage, get on Twitter or yell at people from a safe distance. But after that, what can we do moving forward to, start something that will actually address the root of the issue, and not just make us all feel better because it was a kind of catharsis, right?
Yeah, no, that's something that I also see, right? We don't look at sort of the internal libidinal responses to things and stuff like that. What sort of like what I see and what you're talking about, right? Like, are we going to go back to business as usual? In my mind, sort of the original classic Marxist approach is business as usual, right? Like, there's something else, like when you're looking at, like, all right, shit's bad, what do we do about it, right? There's an entire theoretical mapping and like sort of things that like approach that's been practiced for so long that in so many ways, like, I've heard people say, like, on Twitter, they're like, your bosses, the government doesn't want you to read Marx. I'm like, it's ironically in a way, like, and I think people should read Marx. I like Marx. But ironically, in a way, it's almost exactly what they want you to do, right? Your pen, they can pin you down, right? There's a mapping of historical thought there that's familiar to these people. They understand how to categorize you as a Marxist, and I think this goes into a little bit of like the Deleuzian, like, schizophrenic or what he talks about with society as a control, where there's like this ideological control, and you're more like you're a little bit more controllable with prior historical thought, even if it's something like Marxism that's against the status quo and stuff. And so, right, like I think that it almost involves creativity, right? Where it's not going to be anything that's oh shit, like we've tried before, I suppose. Yeah.
Do you mean, I'm curious, when you say like that Marxism is business as usual, do you mean like kind of the sort of like stereotypical or like tip, or maybe not even stereotypical, but just typical Marxist critique that we see of society,
Yeah.
that like just kind of doing the same thing and like falling into these same almost like channels of behavior that like aren't actually doing anything? Like, I don't know, like for example, like one thing that came to my mind, which I think I saw you tweeting about before, right? It's like, saying that AOC isn't like, left enough, right? It's like that's like a typical like cringy Marxist response to something. And then it's like, is that actually good for like pulling us towards like better outcomes, to just like be fixated on like this kind of, I mean, I don't know, is that the sort of thing you have in mind?
Right. Well, so the online Twitter anti-AOC thing, I wouldn't even consider them Marxist. They are
Right.
like the bottom of the fucking it's actually like kind of hilarious. I love that shit. But regardless, I do get a little sad, right? I have a little bit of investment here with a sort of Marxian analysis of things, right? I think there's a lot of especially on a political field, there's a lot to work off of, right? There's a reason why critical theory, Marx is one of the most cited thinkers in critical theory among Freud and stuff. So I think with people who are actually serious about theory, which there are a lot of Marxists that are, I think there's like this disconnect though, that I think that like any new approach to things, and it has to be new. We're continually in a realm and political world of new stuff, new problems that have to be overcome, and I don't think it's not going to involve a pure Marxist quote unquote approach. But again, people are tied to like what we're talking about with semiotics and symbols. Like they're married to their symbols, right? And there's a question here. It's like, how do we sort of get people to look beyond quote unquote their symbolism or their preferred ideological narrative, right?
Yeah, I remember I used to have a professor who was kind of my mentor in undergrad, and she used to always say, we have to focus on particular problems with particular solutions in particular circumstances, like in the sense of like as opposed to being so fixated on this kind of the signifier of socialist transformation, right? It's like, which again, there's so much vagueness about what the signifier of socialism is referring to exactly. And it's like, if you're just fixated on, I mean, that's why I get frustrated with a lot of political theory like left political theory that's really like fixated on that moment of social transformation, because it's like what are the particular circumstances that can make such a transformation possible, that is like, I feel like under examined, because it's related to what Erik was talking about, where people like, they get, there's a kind of affective like payoff to feeling this righteous stance that you're taking by being, by getting those ecstatic moments that are maybe fueled by a kind of belief in the signifier of Marxism or anarchism or whatever the radical case may be, right? With Occupy, right? It was, getting behind that. Well, we're just going to be here, but what is that? What's next? Let's talk about more specific things rather than, I don't know, just making your anger known. Which, like, I agree with Erik that it's an important, potentially generative step, but just frustrating how that's so often where it ends.
Yeah, my introduction to Marxism was actually through like the Birmingham School of Culture Studies. So people like Stuart Hall and Raymond Williams and Richard Hogarth and that sort of thing. And the way I'd like to put it is that we kind of have to be constantly theorizing as we are going forward, addressing our sort of political and specific problems. We have to be constantly theorizing because there's always something new, right? Like we're in the capitalist mode of production right now, but it's not just a homogenous mode of production we exited the feudal and we entered into the early modern slash capitalist mode. Because what Raymond Williams emphasizes in an essay he does on the base and superstructure is that you have the present mode of production. We always have you have the residual mode as well. So what's left over from the last one? You have people like the aristocratic classes. I don't know, maybe the Queen of England is like the residual class par excellence. And then you have the emergent. You have what's new. And I think those moments of emotional outburst when a whole load of bodies suddenly take on all of these different affects, like that's a sign of the emergent. And we should look at that and we should try to generalize it in terms of the mode of production that we're in right now. But you always have to remember that, Marx said that capitalism is ultimately going to create the conditions that allow us to abolish it. And I think that's what Williams is calling the emergent. So we have to always have our eyes open for what is emergent within our mode and what is residual, what is fading away, what's going to last a bit longer. Like World War One was probably the moment where a lot of the old aristocratic styles of leadership were just completely erased, and we fully moved into this democratic, liberal, capitalist, neoliberal kind of path that we're on now. And now we have to pay attention to what is emergent within this mode and try to, I don't know, pull out some generalizing is always good, I think. And like, because I mean, from my perspective, there's no such thing as the particular. There's no such thing as the absolutely determinate, right? Even in perception, all you really catch is general forms and vague outlines of things, and you construct those into an image of the world. And from a political perspective, you also encounter particular circumstances, but there are things that are relevant for other people at other times as well. So I mean, again, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, though, Epoch.
I don't know. I don't know if I would say that at all. No, but I mean, that's sort of a lot of for the longest time where my headspace has been at, right? Because I used to sort of consider myself a maybe what we could call like an explicit quote unquote classical Marxist early on in my theoretical journey, but I think the point isn't to be anything, right? Like I think that's sort of like you're saying, like the point is to look at the emergent, right? And this emergent is based on sort of like a mode of production on what's going on right now, and understanding these, especially in a society like this, or a mode of production that's moving so fast and rapidly, like we're experiencing today. The goal is to constantly try to question and look beyond things, right? And I think that's, in my mind, man, I'm kind of set there. That's the only thing like that we could do for a potential emancipatory sort of thing. It can't. It's more harmful, I think, to try to stick to prior theoretical terrains than it is to, really try to look past things and try to figure out and get creative and look at something anew, right?
And you never know what's going to work either.
Right.
You have to be careful, because then when you commit yourself to something, you still have to remain open to the possibility that it's not going to work. I mean, things like accelerationism, for example, like that's something new, but it has all kinds of different threads now, and some of them are very strange. But I mean, like it's a new view to commit yourself to, and of course, yeah, try it, see if it works, but like also be open to the possibility that it's going to be a dead end, right? There's been plenty of dead ends in even in the 20th century, different things that we like. I mean, the internet was supposed to be this great democratizing force that's going to move us beyond the sort of very limited representational democracy that we can only manage without the internet. We're going to have so much representation, and everyone's going to be able to give their point of view, and that turned out to be a kind of, I mean, at least from my perspective, a dead end. Like, of course, we have Twitter and social media, and we can argue about things, but we're still in a kind of capitalist media era. So all of that is really just a safe space. It's contained within the market situation, and it's not like nothing that happens on social media is going to be radical enough. I mean, of course, there's been really great things that have happened. Facebook groups being used to organize resistance and treat like really fast response to disasters and things like that in other parts of the world. But I mean, you could just as easily say the opposite, right? Like, what was it, Myanmar, the fascists using Facebook to spread kind of anti-Muslim propaganda and things like that. So I mean, you have to be aware that these things can go in either direction, and they could lead to a dead end. They could make things worse. But I mean, I'm not saying that's a reason not to commit yourself to something new and exciting, but you just have to check yourself at the same time and be aware that it could be leading nowhere or to disaster.
Spoken like
Yeah,
a
and I mean-
true lib. Sorry, what's that, Victor?
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, but it's true that we do have that like the it's a double-edged sword, right? Like the fact that we are have our channels and like our podcasts, and we're like getting the opportunity to find like-minded people who are interested. Like that's, of course, the internet brought all that, but I think like anything that is so-called supposed to democratize something, I think you just have to assume that you're going to see both the worst and best of people.
Mhm.
If there's an opportunity for them to do the worst possible thing with it, they probably will. And I think there was just a lot of optimism that that we would only see the best of people from the internet, but I think clearly that didn't turn out to be the case. So
Yeah, no, I read Zizek. I think it was his little book, The Relevance of the Communist Manifesto, and he talked about how, he always talks about how capitalism consumes its own critique. It's really good at that, and the internet's a perfect example, right? The internet was the immediate emancipatory plane of technology, and and it's supposed to essentially bring people together in a common sort of consciousness. And now people are on Reddit arguing about what the best fucking Marvel movie is, or their sports team, and or who's lib or who's not. There's an entire culture industry, right, of politics um, that is, in my mind, this is also where my headspace is. I'm seeing like a political culture industry on steroids that we've never seen before because of the internet. And when we talk about how bad sort of televised media is, mainstream media like Fox News and shit, and it sucks, right? But now we're in a world where I think the internet is like Fox News and MSNBC on fucking steroids, and we don't even understand half of the harmful effects yet.
Definitely,
yeah, I mean,
reactionary force here.
and just like the way that like videos are like labeled, right? It's like to like destroys this person or whatever, like whatever analysis, these like over the top things, and it's all to like stimulate that. I don't know what part of our brain that's supposed to be stimulating, but it's like I think it's supposed to be stimulating like the part of us that I think gets really emotionally attached, or maybe it's a similar mechanism at least to what makes us so attached to these kind of broad signifiers. I feel like it's like, oh, I'm not that. I'm like, oh, this person's destroying this person that I don't like, and it's like it kind of gets to reinforce that simplification of the world. And then obviously like you can see people taking advantage of that I guess feature of our human subjectivity to the advantage of getting more views and stuff, and then that just ends up creating a reinforcing effect, obviously. But yeah,
I mean, it's those dopamine hits, right? Like we're with social media, we're always in a state of high arousal, and that's what content producers focus on is high arousal, keeping people in this emotional readiness for terrible news, and then the next day you flip through your news feed, and of course there's all kinds of crazy shit like that, or on YouTube there's these things about destroying people, and I think it's always the media needs to keep turning it up a notch, because now my baseline is this emotional state of high intensity arousal. So you're going to need some pretty intense content to break through that shit and give me an even higher high. And then when
Yeah.
that happens, once that's normalized, what's next? I don't know. Is it a slippery slope? Maybe not. Maybe something will just change. But that's kind of this baseline state everyone's at, is just really intense emotional arousal. I found that during the Trump administration, like every day, I couldn't not wake up and read what has this idiot done next. now. And then now during the pandemic, it's the same thing. Like I'm looking at the news and it's like, oh yeah, February, we're almost out of it. And then by March, it's like, oh shit, no, wave 3, never mind. And it's just this intense emotional arousal that eventually we're going to get used to, and it's going to take something even more to knock us out of that. I don't know. That would be a good thing for an experimental psychologist to look into and try to figure out what's the limits of these sorts of dopamine feedback systems that we're trapped in and that we love. Like I like it. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't knock anybody who's on the sort of doom scrolling feed train, but I mean, you got to wonder where it's going.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I noticed too about like as far as infotainment or information goes, it's like it's really funny. Like even independent online politics is like it's becoming like sublimated even beyond itself. So like an example of this, I noticed like Victor, you were talking about destroyed. So it's like what I'll see now is like Jimmy Dore, fuck David Dole, like X content creator, fucked X content creator, right? And like you get into like a hyper reality or like a simulacrum beyond itself, right? Like we're not even talking about politicians or like politics. We're talking about people we're talking about people talking about politics, right? Like it's this fucking really weird, strange simulation that it's like a feedback loop beyond like even like our emotional impetus, like how we feel things. Like it's almost like so deeply ideological, and goddamn, man, there's no, I don't even know, but that's something that I don't see anyone really recognizing in the slightest. It's a little worrying.
Well, that's interesting because that's kind of one of the things that informs my research about social change is like, I see this mechanism happening and I just see it as a real like serious barrier to, I don't know, visualizing some world where we're gonna have people who are like, participatory citizens who, this is what the participatory democratic theorists talk about, right? It's like, give the opportunity to people to be more democratic in their workplace or be more democratic in whatever environment. And it's like, that's gonna lead, there's an assumption that that's gonna lead to almost like a civically virtuous citizen where it's like, I will see my political adversary's opinion as something that I disagree with, but it's not going to be like I'm not going to want to destroy them. This is what the agonistic democratic theorists talk about as agonism instead of antagonism, right? And it's like I always feel like the idea that could happen has to overcome these giant barriers of how I saw someone in the chat say like our limbic system, right, is stimulated. And that just seems like something that I'm not noticing a lot of more egalitarian political theorists talking about, like that worry. I think in the tradition of left-wing political theory, there's been this almost overcorrection from reacting against like the Lockeans or the Homo economicus, where man is this rational animal, and they like or the kind of Rousseau reaction to Hobbes, right? Where like Rousseau was like, no, human beings aren't all evil, right? And I feel like the left has just kind of unthinkingly taken up that Rousseauian critique too much and forgotten that, well, wait, like maybe there's all these, like, not that human beings are evil or selfish, but they're vulnerable to all these mechanisms that make them really shitty citizens. And I'm not really sure how we're going to get around that, I guess.
Society that corrupts us, man. We should all go back and live in the woods.
Yeah, that's, well, like what you're saying there too, right, is there is this like Rousseauian response to that, and what I see is this like sort of, there's almost like a postmodern nihilism, right? A new nihilism that we've yet to see. It's like, and it's like, I guess some people online call it doomerism, right? But I think what's important to understand that a lot of people don't understand is that like someone like Lacan can kind of explain this. I think can kind of help explain is that, look, the real is like, look, like everything we're doing is a symbolism and a sort of in a symbolic realm in the most abstract way. And I think whenever you trying to explain to people that when things happen, we have to take a more playful approach, kind of helps protect us from getting into that doomerous state and taking certain really dumb shit too seriously. Right, where you're like, oh fuck, where everything's destined to fail, and like people suck, and there's this new nihilism on steroids that even Nietzsche would be fucking like. I don't even think, yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know, I don't know what the answers are, but there's a lot of really weird shit that is happening really, really fast just because of the digital sphere of online politics. And man, I think you guys are sort of on the same trajectory, and you guys have a lot of the same intent, but that's been a lot of my thing is like, god damn, like at least can we try to get some content or, some free stuff out to people that can hopefully be a little bit more helpful and entertaining and meaningful,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an appetite for this. It's just not the majority, or
Right.
even probably the plurality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tough line to walk because you want to make appealing content, but you also want it to be, deep and meaningful. And I think the purpose of our project of bringing together, critical theory and the podcast format is because there's a lot of great ideas that still need to be mined from the tradition of critical theory and Marxist criticism, and even, other things of idealist philosophy and empiricism. Like there's still a lot of valuable material that we need to mine from these things. It's like sometimes people seem to think like, oh yeah, that happened in the 20th century, so it's not relevant anymore, or that's been done. German idealism, the whole project has been done and it's exhausted now. But it's like, no, there's still interesting things that we can do with these ideas. And so to take these old ideas and try to repackage them into a new and appealing format without simplifying them or just turning it into a capitalist shit show where I talk for 5 minutes about Foucault and then 1 minute about how you sleep and whether you should order this new mattress, or whether your wealth management apps are sufficient for your purposes. Like, I don't know. It's a weird area to be in, but I think because critical theory maybe can support a range of ideological perspectives. Foucault, for instance, was sort of famously critical of Marxism, but I would still consider him to be within the critical theory tradition. But you can be an Althusarian, and the Baudrillardians might hate you, but you're still a critical theorist. There's still valuable things there that we need to keep thinking about, because the 20th century isn't done. It's just past, but it shouldn't be forgotten, I guess,
Right.
is what I should say.
Right. There's again, Pills made that last video on Deleuze and Nietzsche. That was just probably his best. But yeah, you mine for gold and you sift out the sand that's not valuable. I remember I've always kind of had that approach naturally, but I totally get if people don't, right? Like we tie certain ideas into personalities or stuff like that. But that's why, like, I remember you guys did that for a while. With you guys had the discussion with, what was it, Ronald Biener with Nietzsche and Heidegger, and that was kind of like one of my biggest things. I'm like, look, like it's a little bit of a moralized approach to it. Like I think that like it's like really good to point out the sort of reactionary tonalities with Nietzsche and Heidegger, and I totally see that reading both of them. It's like it's there, right? But I think in a lot of ways we got to be able to look beyond that,
Yeah, I think like Biener is very well-meaning with
Right.
his project, but I think it's just kind of ironic that he also has like a big dark web following, because he's the guy out there who is sort of distilling all of the reactionary and dangerous things you find in Nietzsche and Heidegger and Marx, and he's putting them all together and saying like, look, like you got to be careful about these ideas because they can be misconstrued, and then the people who want to misconstrue them are the ones who are following him and reading his stuff. So I think it's even that sort of well-meaning project can
That's
go awry,
fucking-
and it's
Yeah, it's
kind of
true.
funny. Yeah, it's weird. He gets messages from crazy folks who like his work, but for the wrong reasons, I guess you'd say.
Holy
Not for
fuck.
reasons he would like. But yeah, I mean, the episode itself is just fun stuff, because we all have, like Matt and me and Victor and Pills, we all kind of have different perspectives and we disagree about how to talk about these things. So it just makes it fun. And
Yeah, it's
having a big academic on is always a fun thing too.
Mhm.
yeah, it's funny. Beaner told us. I think I'm not sure if it might not have been on the podcast episode itself, but yeah, he did have like someone who's pretty much self-describes as a Nazi, like review his book on his like website where he pushes kind of the more like fascist, like white nationalist ideology, and it was a positive review of the book. The guy was like, this is like good. Like read this. Like our followers should read this to understand where we're coming from. So it's pretty funny.
Very unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that we don't all subscribe to the way Beaner puts it, but I mean, I think it makes a good broader point about academia and stuff, right? Because this, without podcasting and theory tube, academia is really the only way you're going to get real comprehensive exposure to these ideas. But the academic model is so, I don't know, reactionary, regressive, for lack of a better term, because it's all about compartmentalizing things into different disciplines and orienting them towards outcomes and performance reviews and how many people get jobs after your degree. And I think a lot of that is, I mean, maybe it's just good sense, but I think a lot of it goes against some of the principles of critical theory. The idea is that you shouldn't break things down into disciplines because that sort of repeats the whole model of capitalism and the way we make people specialize in certain things, and we set them to work in the factories and they have their own very specialized task among the broad range of tasks performed along the assembly lines, and you don't get that more broad interdisciplinary global perspective. If you want to go to university for those kinds of programs that are interdisciplinary and try to really break down those barriers and take seriously, I don't know, ideas like transversality from Guattari or something like that, then those are really marginalized. Those are very, very marginalized departments. I mean, I'm in one of them, and it's kind of funny and ironic also then to watch the news and see the idea that like humanities profs and critical theory people are running rampant at the universities, and they're convincing people that America's racist and all these things. And then from my perspective, I'm sitting in some of the most underfunded, marginalized fucking departments in the world, trying to make ends meet and get myself a career while being honest, like kind of intellectual at the same time, juggling all these different things. And then hearing I'm also part of this movement that's taking over the universities and becoming this mainstream wokeism. And it's just a really weird kind of situation. And I don't know, I think it's ultimately a good thing. It's like growing pains of this new 21st century capitalist I don't know, crisis that we're in the midst of. But that's how it is.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, that's the big thing right now in the United States is this critical race theory stuff. And I'm not gonna lie, I have never being in the United States. I've never. It was the same. I've never. I don't think I've ever taken a course. I've taken courses in sociology, philosophy, whatever. We've never touched on critical race theory once. It was kind of like the in 20. I went to university. My first year was 2016, and I remember thinking, I'm like, man, I'm waiting to see the SJWs. I wonder if like I was like, man. When I was there, I was like, where the fuck's the SJWs, man? Where are the fucking pink-haired fucking SJWs? I like, I was like, that was the peak of the whole, like, SJW rave on the internet. And I remember going to, like, university. I'm like, the fuck? They're not existent. Like, they're not here. Like, I was like...
Reminds me of Zizek. Where are the Marxists? Where are the Marxists? Name one.
I know. No, it's totally true.
He's like, the study I have. Name one. No, you can't, because it's just like, okay, I can name the person who invented intersectionality theory, but I mean that doesn't prove.
I mean, it's true that like I will definitely always agree that it's like way blown out of proportion, but like they definitely exist, and particularly at your university too. Erik, you know that, I think. No?
Yeah, I mean, it must be that Canadian universities are just a very different environment than American ones, because it doesn't seem like it's as much of an issue in the Canadian press. I mean, it's there insofar as politicians are kind of following Trump's lead low key, especially like the Ford family and like some of those conservative politicians we have up here taking some cues. And but I mean, you gotta remember that the medium is the message, right? How does the media select and sell and package news to us? It wants to package that, again, that high impact, high intensity content, and a news story that tries to thoughtfully break down wokeism and understand the differences between like Foucault's theory and the way it's being used in the media. Like those articles are going to get no reads, but the articles that are like the woke is taking over the universities, those are going to get read. So I mean, the medium is the message there. Not the content is dog shit, because that's how digital media works. It works high impact, high intensity, get viewers, and that's what it is, and it simplifies things. And that's the problem, again, is that we need complexity, but we have to walk this fine line, like I was saying earlier, of packaging this content in a thoughtful but appealing way that's not going to put people off. Because who the fuck has time to go spend 10 years of their life and like read this stuff in depth, write a dissertation and spend all that money and get a degree? A lot of people don't have time to do that. It's becoming a less appealing option. We don't even know by the time we're done how valuable our degrees are going to be. But so we need a way, and that YouTube and podcasting and Twitter and social media, for lack of better options, those are our ways of doing it right now. And some of we've done the work, obviously, on the PillPod. We're in university, we are doing the work. Some of us are done, but we're just exploring new ways to get our ideas out there. Because obviously, the old adage, you write a paper, you're going to get like 5 reads. It's going to be your committee's going to read it, maybe your mom is going to read it, and your girlfriend and anyone else you can corner in the bar and throw a PDF on their computer or something like that. But nobody's going to read it. So this is the way you get these ideas out there, and you platform different points of view. But and then of course the fucking right figures all this shit out too, and the regressive element comes into play as well. And so it just becomes another battlefield. And I don't know. Like for me, that's kind of where we're at right now. Like the internet is a battlefield, and we're kind of warriors on that battlefield. And I
Well,
don't know. It's a mess.
that's what
Yeah.
I was gonna say that too. Like this gets into the core of like semiology, right? I remember explicitly. I don't get as much time to watch your guys's or listen to your guys's pill pod. I was actually on a plane ride to California not too long ago, and I listened to semiology one, Erik, and you said explicitly what's happening, sort of in a way you were talking about. I think it may have been debate. Is it's a warlike structure, right? And I think on the internet, that's exactly right. And that's something metaphysically I almost consider that warlike competitive thing a sort of metaphysical structure in classic Western sort of culture society. That is sort of our weird ontology, is one of vacuous separation of subjects, objects, and there is a tension, a negative tension between those two. And I think that's so wrong, right? Like, and ironically, I think one of the best people who sort of describes this in an easy way to understand is like Marx and the division of labor. Why the division of labor? Why capitalism's bad is because it pits man versus man. Our species essence is one of cooperation. That's how society moves forward. It's cooperation. And ironically, Marxists are some of the biggest warlike, like online warlike entities, and they, to be fair, a lot of Marxists don't read Marx, but yeah, to say the least. But no, like I'm actually a bit of a firm believer. I don't have too dogmatic of a metaphysics, but my metaphysics is certainly in the tradition of cooperation, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I think I was pointing out that a lot of the, I mean, this is such a long tradition, but a lot of our words we use when we're describing arguments and people's ideas and things are grounded in military metaphors, right? Like
Yeah.
you say, I'm going to undermine your position, I'm going to defend my position, I'm attacking this point, I'm defending, like it's all military metaphors that go way back to like medieval philosophy. Like go read the way Abelard talks about his own life, and he's always at war with some other sect of scholasticism, and he puts it in these really sort of epic, almost romance terms, like romance in the sense of like a knight on a great journey and fighting evil. And he has, and I don't think we have not gotten away from that at all. That's like a very deep part. It's built into the way we talk about argumentation and logic and reason. And it's just, I mean, it's not to make any grand point to point that out, except to say that that's what we're dealing with. And yeah, I like that idea that we should also try to foster the creation of concepts and ideas around cooperation and helping one another and altruism and all that crap too. And maybe that's a sort of more undeveloped section of our conceptual apparatus, especially online is just a mess of hyper aggression. And the fact that you can do it all from a place of anonymity doesn't help, because it sort of defends you from any kind of repercussions of what you're saying as well. So it kind of encourages people to go a little bit further, right? Like, you got the first whiffs of this when maybe online console gaming came into play with the early Xbox and PlayStations, right? If you ever played Call of Duty back then,
dude.
people were fucking aggressive. And if somebody was like had a female voice, if they detected a female on the game too, like they would just unleash on them, and it was horrifying. It's just it's just something we have to deal with. I don't know how to solve. I don't know where I'm going with any of that, but it's there.
No, yeah, absolutely.
I remember those days a little bit. I was playing Xbox Live on the first Xbox way back in the day, and it was pretty toxic. But what I was going to say is picking up on what you said, Eric, about the sort of soldier metaphors that are used. So I'm actually been listening to this audiobook. I just went on a little trip out of town with my girlfriend, and we were listening to it in the car. I think Eric, you gave me shit for tweeting about it because you thought this woman was like a rationalist or something. Julia Gatliff. She wrote a book called The Scout Mindset. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but it talks exactly about like the soldier metaphor as like a soldier mindset, where like your engagement to truth, because it's so kind of structured by this metaphor of like being a defender of your perspective, it kind of like closes you out from being more open. And she kind of makes this argument for being a scout instead of a soldier, which is like, rather than defending your position, you're just trying to get an accurate map of the world. So you're scouting the terrain in front of you, as opposed to being like a soldier who's trying to gain ground, right? Instead, you just accept the world as it is and try to map it as accurately as you can and revise your map. Only got like a bit, an hour and a bit into it, but it's interesting so far. In any case,
the mapping, the scouting, the soldiering. I mean, what I always think of in this sort of stuff is that state of nature idea that people tend to have, is like, without society, we're in a state of nature, and then it's everyone for themselves, man against man, and we tend to project that idea into the rest of nature as well. And this is one of the things I love about reading Latour, is Latour collaborates a lot with primatologists and people who go out and study animals and nature, and they are very aware that of our ideas about humans in a state of nature get projected onto animal life all the time, and that like the alpha and the beta talk and all of that sort of thing as well. Like what's some recent research came out about wolf packs, for example, that they don't have this super aggressive structure, that a pack is actually a family and they're all related to one another. Or I think Latour also cites Shirley Strum, I think her name is. She studies baboons, and she comes to the conclusion that aggression and male domination is actually a kind of outlier in their usual behavioral patterns. And the default way is to be political, but a politics of care and exchanging of favors and doing things for one another and for the benefit of the whole troop. I think you call a bunch of baboons a troop. Doing things in the name of the troop and what's good for the troop, rather than this individual aggressive structure we all just tend to assume that wolves and baboons and whatever else have. is like the biggest one dominates and gets all the females, and I mean, like that's true in some cases. Like you can see that, but in many ways we've overgeneralized that aspect. And it's just because of the way we talk about politics and humans, right? We assume that the state of nature has to be this, like without civilization. We brought civilization to the rest of the world because everyone would just be uncultured and killing each other all the time. And I mean, it's not necessarily true. And I think we should really re examine that way of looking at things.
Right. And what's even funnier, what we're going on about is that people will use the state of nature to justify things in a very a social context, right? They're like, oh, well, this is just how it works. I'm like, well, we're not in a state of nature. And they'll use that as a defense for certain things, and especially on a political level, austerity and shit. And like, there's a sort of, I know in a political context, there is sort of a primitivist level of how we should look at welfare systems and stuff like that. It's like, well, one argument that I've even seen, it's a bit of a stupid, like even for like right wing sort of politics, it's extra stupid. But like, oh, well, that's just how things should be, right? The state of nature is man versus man. It's like, and you'll see that sort of blind justification for how we should run society. So it's really quite. There's a lot of varying levels of stupidity there, right?
Yeah, it's that strange error of assuming that the development of the entire like human race can be mapped on to the development of an individual from childhood to adulthood. That you start out as this like primitive, almost equal to like a tribe type person, and then you gradually grow up and internalize all of the constraints and rules of society. And I think Freud kind of does this a little bit. If you read Civilization and its Discontents, it's almost like the development of human civilization historically, what we might call the phylogenesis of the human race, is repeated by the ontogenesis of a single individual. So then ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and it's a I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's an assumption, and people take it for granted. It's not. It's a thesis that needs evidence to back it up.
No, that's right. Victor, how about you? What's on your mind?
I mean, I was thinking about something that Erik said a lot earlier in the conversation. That like maybe is unrelated to this, but it was in my mind for some reason, like accelerationism as being like a kind of reaction to like the present, almost kind of hopeless doomerist moment that we find ourselves living in. And I guess accelerationism, I think it would just be, I don't know how, well, I mean, maybe before I decide to define it, I mean, how would you define it? I don't know, Epoch or Erik, like.
Erik?
God, I don't want to step in it with this one. I mean, I read a book called The Great Acceleration, but that's not an exposition of accelerationism. That's about the massive technological and economic and capitalist kinds of accelerations that we experienced after the Second World War. Everything was kind of kicked up into hyperdrive, and new technologies, new sorts of new forms of democracy and things like that were coming and going quite quickly. And so, I mean, and also like when you think of the climate crisis and the massive upshot of carbon being put out into the climate, that began in the 70s as well, sort of a little bit later than the post World War II era. And I mean, I come from that perspective. That I agree with, but with accelerationism, I can't define it because I haven't read, what the Accelerationist Reader. I haven't read much Nick Land.
Okay.
I haven't read some of that stuff. So I know where to go to find it. So if you want it defined, just go pick up the Accelerationist.
Well, it's funny because I think that it makes sense that like you said it in the previous context, which I know was a while ago in this conversation, because I guess the way I like normally think about it on like online politics circles, it's like the idea that we just kind of need to run our current world into the ground so that we can start afresh, right, with something new.
Right. I think that's it.
Yeah. And that like scares the shit out of me. But like I get the response. But yeah, like I mean that happened to be what I was thinking of me about when you caught me in that moment there, Epoch. So I don't know how helpful that is. But.
No, totally fine, dude. You know what's funny is that Nick Land sort of is the forefather of how we think of accelerationism today, and it makes perfect sense. I don't know. Do you guys follow Nick Land on Twitter? Like,
it's funny. People always are asking Pills to do a video about Nick Land for some reason, and Pills is always like, "No, I don't want to." So
I struggle with that as well. I almost don't really want to. Well, I find like early Nick Land I know very little, but fairly fascinating, right? But at the same time, the dude is a really interesting character. When you guys see like what he writes about now today, it makes perfect sense that he had this probably from the very beginning a emotional impetus towards something like accelerationism. The dude is fucking batshit insane, and there's almost like a violent tinge to everything he talks about, right? It seems to be like just cynicism on steroids, and in like the most hateful ways. Like it's really it's something else, man. Psychologist needs to check that dude out.
but then on the other hand, I think there's like I think we can understand the intuition. Sorry, when we feel frustrated with how things are going in the world, that it's like, what's actually going to cause anything to change?
Right. No, 150%.
Right? And it's like, I could totally see how you get to a certain point and you're just seeing how shitty things are and the stasis and how like nothing is happening. And I could see how someone would be like, well, we just need to fucking burn this shit so that we can maybe learn our lesson and do something different. And it's like, that's in some ways, like, that's why it scares me, because like I get that part of it, right? Like that intuition, like in our doomer world, like I could see how you could kind of like come to that conclusion. It's not totally unintuitive, I guess is the point.
Yeah, I mean, I might, if you've listened to our stuff, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but with what worries me about that idea is, okay, I get like the social and cultural side of it, like just, I don't know, maybe right accelerationism is like just be racist or something, just like speed it up, just spearhead that shit and like speed it up so we get through it. But on the sort of ecological environmental side, which I'm also very concerned about, it doesn't seem like a very good option, because we do need a working climate and ecosystem to support whatever kind of future society we want to build. It requires sustenance and a functioning biosphere. And I don't think that part is being very considered in this whole way of thinking, is that it just kind of leaves out the environmental side. And when I, even like some of it is drawn from Deleuze and Guattari, but when I read Guattari's solo work, like the three ecologies, he talks about environmental ecological issues that capitalism is kind of causing and also willfully blind to. And it, like, that part is what worries me. And I've said all this before on other things, but yeah, I also take a very sort of ecological biospheric perspective on these things as well, as part of my interests.
Yeah, no, for sure. There was something else too. You're talking about like there's a level of sustenance that has to be present, and I don't know if you guys have heard, right? Like in a political context, it seems like there's always, especially around any sort of form of radical politics that includes right-wing politics or left-wing politics, there's always the question of revolution. And it's like, it's really actually interesting how, in my mind, it's as a big of a question it still is, because there's actually a lot of research to look at like the economic impact, or rather socioeconomic impact, and how it would affect things. And no one seems to like look at this, but I was curious that there's been research done if there was a civil war in the United States or a revolution. And they concluded, I think there was a couple studies, like, dude, 95% of the population would starve. Like, the way our infrastructure works today, quite literally, like 95% of our entire population would be facing starvation. And that's like how are we so stuck in such a pure theory? Like, we're theory people, but people online, that's pure theory, right? If you're talking about theory outside of any material scientific referent, I mean, oh my God, like gunning for something, say like revolution, without at least acknowledging some research like that, that's wild. That's something I found fascinating, right? That when you really understand that, you take that seriously and you try to separate ideology and try to look at it in a little bit more of a concrete sense. You're like, holy fuck, this is a little bit, ooh, this is a weirder situation than what I thought, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, look at all the trouble that the pandemic has caused for supply chains and logistics already, and it's not even a war. It's like a slow punch. You get sick 14 days later, but still managed to fuck everything up. Because today we have these supply chains that are mostly owned from production to consumption, and they are very like on schedule delivery, carefully tuned supply chains. And then when something like a pandemic hits, they don't have any more flexibility. If you're into cybernetics, you might say that there's no redundancy there. There's no assurance if something goes wrong on one branch of the supply chain that you just swap to another, because we've been experiencing such sort of stable climate up until maybe the 80s and 90s that none of that was a concern. But now today it is a concern, but it's so difficult to change because that rigidity is also built into it, because that's what capitalism tends to do. You look for places to cut money, you want to trim the fat, and the fat often is what allows for the flexibility that we need to respond to some kind of crisis situation. Well, it looks like Victor's winding down here.
Yeah, so Victor, you said you had to I think you had to go right around this time. I apologize, I forgot the time.
Oh, it's all good, man.
But
But
no, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, happy to be here, but I don't know if you guys are gonna keep talking. But I just gotta head out.
Yeah, no
It was a
problem.
pleasure, as always.
We'll probably actually wrap up with you guys here, and honestly, I usually only keep streams about this length, so honestly, we can probably wrap up on all our ends, and then I'll continue on the stream with my audience for a couple minutes, and we'll probably head on out of here.
Okay, awesome.
Right. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for inviting us on. That's great. A lot of fun.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, it was-
We'll have to get you guys both on again. Really, like I like these kind of discussions. These are I don't get to have them enough, honestly, but these are definitely my favorite discussions to have on stream. I appreciate both you guys being here for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Epoch, always a pleasure. Always happy to come back anytime.
All right.
Ooh. All right. Yeah. And thanks everyone for listening to us ramble on. It was great.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you know it's a good stream whenever the ending sort of just like hits you right then and there. So no, seriously guys, let's do this again. I'll message you guys after the stream, and we can talk about stuff maybe to plan in the future or stuff like that. So seriously, thanks a lot. Both you guys are fucking awesome. I appreciate both you guys a ton.
Yeah,
You
appreciate
too,
it.
buddy.
Likewise.
All
Sure.
right.
Looking forward to it.
Hell yeah. I'll see you guys.
Yeah.
All right, guys. How's it going? All right, so we are gonna chill here for just a little bit, but I was gonna talk to you guys a little bit. How did you guys enjoy the stream? I always like having these kinds of discussions, right? It's one thing that I try to avoid, I suppose, whenever I try to get people on, I try to stay far away from the internet sphere of things. And it's always really easy to do that. And it's really easy to talk about things beyond just like the weird simulacrum that is the internet. With people, with Pills or Victor or Erik, I really enjoy that shit a ton. It's a ton of fun. It's an absolute pleasure. And again, like I can only do that. I can only do that with you guys. So like like 57 viewers. I know like a lot of people would. A lot of people are like, oh, that ain't shit. But seriously, like that's guys, I'm very much indebted to you guys, and I appreciate you guys an absolute ton. Like you guys sounds corny, sounds cringe, but what we're doing here is arguably the most important thing I got. And I love it from the bottom of my heart. So I appreciate it a ton. But like we're not necessarily going to end here. We can we'll stream for a little bit longer. But I was just saying yeah, feel like I could talk to you guys for a little bit. So if there was any questions about a discussion or whatever, feel free to hey, so we getting your next vid subtitled? Well, so okay. I used to be able to like subtitle like all of my videos, it takes so long. I quite literally, like, I'm so stretched for time, guys. Like, and especially this semester, I have a horrid semester. It's my last semester. I have to be so hyper efficient and diligent, and I couldn't do the subtitling on the past 5 videos or so. I really I wanted to, but I had someone who offered to subtitle it in Spanish this last video we did. Super fucking kind of him, like beyond kind. I hope when I do this, guys, full time, I can make enough cash where I could pay someone to subtitle. I don't like the idea of someone doing that for free because I've done the subtitling before. It's rough. It's hard. But the question is, will 95% starve anyways if the same system stays in place and automation ramps forward in 80%? Well, I mean, that's a question. We don't know what the future is, though, right? We don't know what the future is. So that's a huge, I mean, that's a potential, right? It's a possibility, but we do know what would happen from a revolution in our current state, right? We do know that concretely. And that's a big difference there, you know? Could you drop a video on Gramsci? If not, fine. Oh, we'll definitely hit Gramsci for sure. I've, I went through a total phase. I think I released like 3 explicit Marxist videos all in tandem with one another. One being Zizek in a Hegelian context, another being Engels' Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, and then the other one being the German ideologies, the beginning of sort of theoretical Marxism. So I'm outside the sphere of explicit Marxism at the moment. So we're doing a lot of other stuff, but we will absolutely come back, right? Guys, I think, if this channel, if I can grow and continue to do this, I mean, there's not going to be a sort of major work or like a major thinker that's not covered. For sure. For instance, half the world population is dependent on food grown with the Haber-Bosch, which needs fossil fuels. Well, it's like there's so many concrete structural things that's not contended with. Sorry. And we seem to ignore those things, and it's easy to ignore them, right? Ideology and certain structures of ideas, the goal is, in some ways, is to rip out sort of prior ideological notions, or say status quo notions of ideas and sustenance, right? That's the whole goal. That's how it functions. It's supposed to destroy another form of thought. And whether we can escape it or not, I don't know. Althusser and Zizek and a lot of other people tried to answer that, but there are things like research gives us a lot of good stuff there, and that's a really important piece of research that I never see referenced. And there's a lot of hostility. I've had some hostility whenever I brought that up. I've been told, well, there's hostility, and then there's people who, in good faith, are like, well, we're already beyond that. We're gonna starve anyways. I'm like, well, you don't know that. I don't know that. We could very well. Climate change could affect everything, but there is such a lack of almost emotional care to the idea that, like, what? Like, are we going to risk, like, 90% of the population for a revolution? Not only that, there's something else that I see on the question of a revolution that's really a problem. It's like, for a revolution to take hold or anything of that nature, you're requiring people give up their lives. And like, if there is an ideological goal there that you can come to that conclusion that, yes, it is very clear everyone should fight to give up their lives for a better world, you really ought to rethink that. Like, I think that a comfort level, I think having such a huge comfort level with that notion is actually a little fucking terrifying. Not to say that negates the proposition of something like revolution, right? I'm not saying that, but there is a very quick response, be like, oh nope, that's still exactly what we need because so and so X theorist said so, or and better arguments that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? Like, oh well, Lenin said this or whatever. That I'm not like, that's a terrible argument, but people will make much more much better arguments about like climate change, right? Because climate change is from what we're seeing is gonna completely it's gonna fuck us up real bad at the least, right? So yeah, was listening to Matt Christman rant about this topic exactly last VOD. The ideology is in place to fully remove us from seeing the consequences. Absolutely. We think that like some certain form of thought is the core ontological truth, right? One of the biggest things that I see as well is the notion of scientific socialism. I know what scientific. I've read, like I said earlier, I'm probably arguably out of any theoretical terrain, I'm most educated around Marxism. Scientific socialism, we use that in a context that not even Marx and Engels really used it. Science itself actually had a little bit of a different tonality today. And even people who accurately talk about scientific socialism, they're open to like, yeah, like it's definitely in the terrain of what we would view as something like a social science, and in some ways even less so, right? Social sciences and some of the methodology is actually more scientific than even the scientific socialism that we saw theorized in the 1800s and early 1900s. So would love to see Matt Christman as a guest. That would be fucking sick. I highly doubt with a dumbass like me that would happen, but I would love that. That would be absolutely phenomenal. David, thank you so much for the $5, friend. Thank you. Dude, you're always so kind. Like, seriously, thank you so much. It means a ton. Absolute ton. It always helps. I'm coming from a biological science approach. Recently got into philosophy. Your channel is a nice help, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I really like the idea of a core sort of hard scientific approach with something like philosophy. I've expressed sort of my my love for something sort of like the idea of a molding of physics and theory. I like quite a bit, and mathematics as well. I really think that there's a lot there that I just don't understand, and theory is such a flexible, all-encompassing thing. I could only imagine something like mathematics and physics could really be an interesting terrain to follow from that. Revolution is a fetish for so many people. Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. It is a fetishized sort of thing. Marxism as a whole I think we're at a point where it is at like peak fetishization, right? You see that with a lot of I see that ironically with a lot of like meme culture. I think there is a sort of there's sort of an unconscious with memes, right? Is a really good way to figure out sort of the underpinnings of what some people think. I saw on r/communism someone made a meme that said postmodernists get the wall. I had a picture of like some Soviet soldier with a PPSH submachine gun, and postmodernists get the wall first. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like when you one thing, talk about horrid political outreach. Like, even to joke about that, it's just like, dude, that's so damning to what you're trying to do. What the fuck? And then on top of that, I mean, I have no reason to believe that there are a lot of people that would absolutely be the case, right? Especially if we practice things in the same terrain, right? People that depend on pharmaceuticals to live, like insulin and cancer treatment, will probably die too in a 100%, right? And there's and we're really quick to throw away vulnerable groups of people really fast under sort of a revolutionary context. We're so quick to do it, and it's again, it's one thing to have a sort of honest approach, right, and a critical approach. I'm not saying those approaches don't exist to the question of revolution, but you don't see that very often. If anything, you 100% see a very, very rabidly ideological approach to things like that, and it's a almost subliminally violent approach. And there is a fetish, there's an anger, right, that drives this. And I don't think cynicism and anger is the correct affect to have towards things like as serious as revolution. Ironically, people who vouch for something like revolution take it the least seriously, I think, in a lot of ways. And it's, again, not to say that revolution, quote unquote, is you know, I just have a more broad view of like revolution. I would consider like radical politics, it has to be revolutionary in a lot of ways. It's just quote unquote revolution is it's going to have to be something way more broad and different and unique and creative than what we've ever seen in the past, I think. And there's questions there, right? But those questions have to be there, you know? Yeah, we don't even. Yeah, I mean, and it's also kind of silly to even talk about it too much, guys. Like, right? Colin pointed this out. It's actually me even taking the time to even talk about this question is actually a little bit stupid on my end too. Like what I'm doing, like it's so pathetically like short-sighted. Or it's like even the fact that I take that question seriously, is actually kind of fucking stupid. Like, I'll be real. Like, let's be honest. Me even talking about this is kind of a little bit of a waste of time. We don't even have fucking, I mean, it's not even like class consciousness. It's like even beyond ideology and ideals, it's like we don't even have like any tangible organization in any capacity for like anything. So yeah, like it's an interesting thing that we have happening here, you know, like it's interesting, man, to say the least. But we'll probably wrap that up here. I figured it'd take a couple minutes to talk with you guys. I really thankful, guys. I'm on the tail end of my degree, and I think, guys, I think what I'll do, I'll put out a video as well. But I'm at like a little bit of a critical point with the channel where it's going to be kind of go time soon, and there's a lot of, and that's really good, right? Like I'm excited for that. Yet at the same time, I'm very nervous because I have a YouTube channel that isn't something where you could like go home after working 40 to 50 hours a week and just make the videos that I make. I couldn't do it. So I either, after I'm graduated, I either am able to sustain this and do this full time, or I'm not. But there's some excitement with that. I'm confident, and I wouldn't do it if I wasn't confident. But I'll probably put out a video, you know, after this next video talking about the future of the channel, and how we're, you know, approaching from here. So yeah, it's a little, I'm definitely I'm a little scared, but I love doing this, you know. So that's why I go on Ryan Knight podcasts. I would. I'm not against that. I make fun of Ryan Knight all the time because he's the funniest fucking online personality in the world. Like, I secretly I have a love for Ryan Knight. Like, I love Alex Jones, right? They're both kind of like, their content's fucking terrible, but it's like it's still it's almost lovable in some ways. I'd go on Ryan Knight's podcast for sure. But yeah, finishing this up, I'm gonna have to, once my degree's done and the summer hits, it's go time. I'm gonna be able to, I think I want to be able to do a couple more things, adding to the channel. I have some projects in mind, stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also a little bit anxious because if I'm not able to do it, I don't know. The channel would probably die. I know I hate saying that, but yeah, I'm at a really insecure state. It's how it always is. It's how it always is with YouTube, I suppose, and graduating from college. This is attainable while being a student, but yeah, I don't know, man. I'm gonna try to do this full time, but if I can't do it full time, we're fucked. But I'm not so like unconfident in that notion that I'd be able to sustain this. Anyways, guys, I appreciate it so much. Talking about sustainability of the channel, I really couldn't do any of this without you. This is my only source of income. This is my gig. It's my job. So if any of you guys are interested in supporting and keeping this alive, I have a Patreon, a YouTube member section. You can hit the join button. I offer all kinds of stuff. It's not just like a supporting thing. I have exclusive content. I just actually did an exclusive video on Spinoza, like a podcast sort of thing. Yeah, so if any of you guys like that, you can vote on future videos. On a $10 tier, I have editing tutorials that you guys can keep forever. If you guys have ever subscribed on the $10 tier, just let me know if another tutorial comes out. I will gladly share that with you. I want to be able to give as much value as I possibly can for anyone supporting. So early access as well. So thank you guys so much again for hanging out. Really consider helping out and supporting on Patreon. It keeps all of this alive. Other than that, another thing that helps is the Amazon link. You guys can bookmark that. Any purchases you make on Amazon helps a ton. I always add some disclaimer to that. If you don't shop on Amazon for ethical reasons already, don't do it because I have a fucking link. But for people who do, like me, I shop on Amazon all the fucking time because it's almost like the cheapest option half the time for me, and I'm broke. Yeah, consider bookmarking it. It's free to you. If anything, in some ways, it might be the more ethical thing to do. Like if you already do shop on Amazon, because they have to pay me, and it takes away from their profit. So, yeah. Either way, thank you guys so much. I'm probably gonna head on out of here. These streams are always a ton of fun, and we're gonna have to have them back on again. Other than that, one more question. Are you guys? I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. Resident Evil 8 comes out this Friday. Are you guys interested in a Resident Evil stream? If you guys are interested in a Resident Evil stream, I may stream some games. I don't typically do that because I have a lot of my viewership plummets when I play games. Like, you know, there's 50 of us here. It goes down to like 10 when I play video games. But yeah, so I'm thinking about doing that. I'm thinking of playing some Resident Evil 8. I really love Resident Evil. But I will see you guys later. We are heading on out of here. Seriously, I can't thank you guys enough. You guys rule. See you.